You can stitch a thing together for 40 years, careful and even, your hands knowing the work in their sleep, and never once notice that the whole time you've been sewing the seam in the wrong place. That is what I did with my own family. I am a quilter. I have made hundreds of them, wedding quilts and baby quilts and burying quilts, and I always thought I knew how to hold a thing together. So you can imagine what it took for me to look up one afternoon, a needle still in my hand, and finally understand that the daughter I had loved the hardest my whole life had been using that love against me like a credit card. And the daughter I had overlooked was the only one who'd ever truly come home. I want to tell you how I saw it at last, because I nearly didn't. And the seeing came so close to coming too late that it still wakes me some nights. This is not really a story about a bad daughter, though there is one in it. It is a story about a foolish, loving old woman who spent 40 years giving the most to the child who needed her least, and who finally, at 71, learned the difference between being needed and being loved. There is a reckoning in it, but the first person who had to answer for something was me. My name is Nadine Buford. I am 71 years old, and I have run Buford's Quilts on the Courthouse Square in the little town of Sweetwater, Kentucky, since my husband Boyd bought me the storefront for our 20th anniversary, back when he still had his health and his laugh. I lost Boyd 9 years ago. The shop is the last thing his hands gave me, and I have kept it open these 9 years, partly because the town needs a place to buy good cotton, and partly because when I am in it, with the bolts of calico catching the morning light and the long quilting frame set up in the back, I am not as alone as I am everywhere else. Boyd was a heavy equipment man, a road builder, with hands like cinder blocks and a heart like a screen door, always swinging open. He never understood quilting for 1 minute of his life, but he understood me, which is rarer. And the day he handed me the keys to that storefront, he said, "Now you've got someplace to put all that love that won't fit in the house." He was righter than he knew. Every Thursday morning for 30 years, a circle of women has gathered around my frame. Ina Pruitt and Erlene and the rest, hands moving, troubles getting stitched into the batting where they belong. And that circle has buried husbands and married off grandchildren and held each other up through every hard thing this town has handed us. A quilt shop is not really about fabric. It is about the people who gather where the fabric is. I knew how to hold a whole town together at that frame. It was only my own family I had the pattern wrong on. Here is the one thing I'll set down plain and not pick at again. A mother thinks she knows her own children the way I think I know a fabric by its hand in the dark. I was wrong about mine for 40 years, in the most ordinary and the most ruinous way a mother can be wrong. I had 2 daughters, and I had decided, without ever once saying it out loud or even to myself, which one needed me and which one didn't. And I had the whole thing exactly backward. Hold on to that, because everything I'm about to tell you is the cost of getting it backward, and the grace of getting to fix it before I died. Let me tell you about my girls. I have to start with Tara, because Tara is the one I always started with, and that was the whole trouble. Tara is my oldest, and from the day she was born, she was the bright, loud, needful one. The one who skinned her knees and cried the loudest, and crawled into my lap and made me feel the way only a needy child can make you feel, like the very sun of somebody's world. I loved that. God forgive me. I loved being needed. And I have to be fair and tell you where it started, because nothing in a family starts where you think. Tara was born too early, a tiny blue thing, and she nearly died in her first month. And I spent 30 nights in a hospital an hour from here, watching her tiny chest rise and fall, while I bargained with God for her life. When you almost lose a child like that, something gets wired into you wrong. Every cry after that felt like the cry of a baby who might stop breathing. I could never tell her no, because some animal part of me was still standing over that incubator. Tara learned, the way children learn the weather, that her distress was the most powerful thing in the house. She didn't decide to become what she became any more than I decided to make her that way. We grew it together, she and I, over 40 years, one rescue at a time. And the rescues, Lord, the rescues. There was the car she let get repossessed at 22, and I drove down and paid the tow and the back payments both. There was the apartment she was evicted from at 26, and the deposit on the next one came out of Boyd's Christmas bonus envelope. There was the wedding to Dwayne Coombs, $11,000 I'm still not sure where I found. And then, 8 years later, the credit cards he'd run up that I paid off quiet so Boyd wouldn't have a stroke over it. Every time, I told myself it was love. I told myself a good mother catches her child every time she falls. I did not understand that a child you catch every single time never once finds out she has legs of her own. And then there is Patsy, my quiet one, my younger girl, who came out of me calm and stayed calm, who learned to tie her own shoes early and never made a fuss, and grew up to be a steady, careful woman who married a good, plain man and raised a boy, and never once in 50 years asked me for a dime. And here is the terrible thing I have to confess to you, because I promised I'd tell this true. I took Patsy's steadiness as a sign she didn't need me. I mistook her not asking for not loving, and her self-sufficiency for a kind of coolness. And somewhere along the way, I let myself believe that Patsy was just fine without me, that she was a little distant, a little hard, when the truth was she'd simply learned, watching me pour everything into her sister, that there was nothing left in the picture for her. I made my own quiet daughter, and then I held her quietness against her. That is the sin I carried into this story, and I did not even know I was carrying it. There is one memory that came back to me later, in the worst of it, and it is the one I'd give anything to undo. Patsy was 9. She'd won a ribbon at the county fair for a little potholder she'd pieced herself. Her first sewing, a blue ribbon, and she'd carried it home pressed flat between 2 pieces of cardboard so it wouldn't crease. And she stood in the kitchen doorway holding it out to me, waiting, glowing. And in that exact moment, the telephone rang. And it was Tara, 20 years old, in tears about some boy. And I waved Patsy quiet and turned my back to take the call. And I talked to Tara for an hour. And when I hung up, Patsy was gone to bed, and the ribbon was on the counter. And I never did say the thing a mother is supposed to say. I found that ribbon in her things years later. Kept. She kept it. The blue ribbon her mother never looked at. A child only has to learn that lesson a few times before she stops bringing you the ribbon at all, and just goes quiet. And you mistake the quiet for not needing you, when the truth is, you taught her there was no use needing you out loud. If you have ever loved one person so loudly that you forgot to look at the one standing quietly beside you, then you already understand the ache that's coming. And I'd be glad to know where you're listening from tonight, and whether you've got a quiet one of your own you ought to call. But let me get back to it, because the day I'm telling you about had already started, and the seam was already pulling loose. It started, the way these things do, dressed up as concern for me. Tara took to coming by the shop more, which I was glad of, because I am lonesome, and a lonesome woman does not look a gift horse in the mouth. She'd sit on the stool by the cutting table and tell me her troubles. And her troubles those days were big ones. Dwayne's contracting business was going under. They were behind on everything. And slowly, gently, the conversation began to turn, every time, to me. To what I had, to the shop, and the house Boyd left me free and clear, and the bit of savings I'd been careful with. The first real cut came on an afternoon in spring. Tara was on her stool, and she looked around my shop, at Boyd's storefront, at the quilts on the walls I'd made with my own hands, and she said, "Mama, can I say something, and you won't get mad? You're 71. You're on your feet in here all day. Don't you think it's time to let this place go? You could sell the building. It's worth a fortune on the square now, and you could finally rest. And honestly, it would help us out of a real tight spot." She said it so sweetly. She had Boyd's storefront sold and the money spent before I'd set down my scissors. And the worst part, the part I'm ashamed of, is that my first feeling was not anger. It was the old familiar pull. Tara needs me. I sat there at 71 and felt that pull like a fish hook in the soft of my cheek. The same hook that had been reeling me in for 40 years. I told her I'd think about it. And I want you to notice, because I didn't notice it then, that she did not say, "Oh, Mama, no, of course not. That shop is your whole heart. I'd never ask you to give it up." She said, "Well, don't think too long. The market won't stay this good." Even then, even at the very beginning, if I'd had my eyes open, that one sentence would have told me everything. But my eyes had been closed for 40 years, and they don't fly open all at once. It escalated, the way it always does, one loving little step at a time. The selling of the shop became a regular subject. Tara would bring it up sideways, the way you test ice. "I drove by a darling condo in Lexington. Mama, no stairs. Wouldn't that be easier on your knees? You know the Hendricks building on the square sold for $400,000, and yours is the better corner." She was appraising Boyd's storefront out loud, in front of me, like I was already gone. Then it grew past the shop. Why didn't I refinance the house? Pull some cash out of all that equity just sitting there to help Dwayne get the business back on its feet? It would only be temporary. They'd pay it back. They always said that. They'd pay it back, and they never once had in 40 years. And I had never once made them, and so why on earth would they start now? My Thursday circle saw it before I did. The way a circle of old women sees everything. Ina Pruitt, who has quilted beside me for 30 years and buried 2 husbands and does not waste words, watched Tara breeze through the shop one Thursday, appraising the building out loud. And after she left, Ina kept her eyes on her stitching and said, quiet, to nobody and to me, "Funny how the ones who never come around sure show up regular once a building gets valuable." Nobody at that frame said amen, but nobody had to. I bristled. I defended Tara. I always defended Tara. And Ina just nodded and let it lie. Because you cannot tell a mother a thing about her child she is not ready to hear. But the words got stuck in me like a burr in a sock, and on the long night that was coming, they were one of the threads I followed back to the truth. Sometimes the people who love you can only plant the seed and wait for the right season to crack it open. Ina planted hers and waited. It came up 6 weeks later, on a night with a pen in my hand. Dwayne came too, near the end of it, which he rarely did, and that should have told me something. He sat at my table with his salesman's smile and called me Mama Buford, which he only does when he wants something. And he walked me through the refinance like it was the most natural thing in the world. All that dead equity, all that money just sleeping in Boyd's house. He had a folder. He had it all worked out. And Tara brought the papers herself a few days later. She'd already been to the bank, already had them drawn up. A refinance that would have pulled out $60,000 and handed it to a sinking ship. And she set them on my kitchen table with a pen, and she put her hand over mine, and she cried. My Tara is very good at crying. She has been practicing on me since 1974. And here is the moment I am least proud of in this whole story. So I'll give it to you straight. I picked up the pen. I sat at Boyd's kitchen table with my dead husband's house on the line and my daughter weeping beside me. And the fish hook pulled. And I picked up the pen to sign away $60,000 of the security Boyd died believing he'd left me. Because my child was crying, and I had never in my life known how to let my child cry. If you have ever been worn down by guilt and love until you'd sign anything to make the crying stop, you know exactly how close that pen came to the paper. It was a 1/4 inch away. I could feel Boyd in the room with me, in his own kitchen, watching his wife about to hand his life's security to the people who'd been bleeding us both for decades. And even his memory couldn't stop my hand, because the guilt was louder than the dead. That is how strong a 40-year habit is. It will overrule your husband's ghost and your own good sense and the plain arithmetic on the page in front of you. A 1/4 inch. What stopped it was the telephone. Tara's telephone, buzzing in her purse, and she stepped into the next room to take it, thinking I couldn't hear, the way people always think an old woman can't hear. But I have good ears, and the house was quiet, and I heard my daughter say to her husband, in a voice with not one tear left in it, flat and businesslike, the boredom plain in it. "No, it's fine. She's signing it. She always signs. She feels too guilty about Patsy not to. I just have to cry a little and she folds. Give me 10 minutes. She feels too guilty about Patsy not to." I sat at that table with the pen in my hand, and I did not move. I could hear her in the next room, brisk and easy, working out logistics with Dwayne about money that wasn't theirs yet. And 40 years rearranged themselves in front of me in the space of one held breath. My daughter had not only seen my favoritism, my guilt, the old wound I'd been hiding even from myself. She had found it, and studied it, and learned to play it like a fiddle. Every tear, for years, had been a finger laid on a string she knew exactly how to pluck. The love I had poured out on her was not a gift she received and treasured. It was a tool she kept in a drawer and took out when she needed something. And there it was, named in her own bored voice from the next room. The truth I had spent 4 decades refusing to look at. She had never needed me. She had needed what I would give her when I felt guilty. And she had been keeping me guilty on purpose, tending my guilt like a garden, because a guilty mother is a generous one, and a generous mother is a very useful thing to have. I set the pen down. I did not say anything when she came back in, dabbing at eyes that had been perfectly dry 10 seconds before. I told her I needed to sleep on it after all, and something in my face must have been new and strange to her, because she looked at me a beat too long before she gathered up her papers and her purse and left. And I think some animal part of her knew the way a fisherman knows by the slack line that the hook had finally pulled free. That was the longest night of my life since the night Boyd died. I put on his old flannel shirt that still hangs on the back of the door, the one I cannot make myself wash because it still holds a little of him. And I sat up in the dark by the window where the fireflies were rising up out of the yard the way they do in a Kentucky June. And I made myself look at the whole 40 years by that small green light. And I want to be honest about what kept me up, because it was not anger at Tara. I have thought about this a great deal since. And the truth is, I could hardly even be angry at her, because the person that I sat up all night being furious with was myself. I had done this. Not the using. The using was hers, and she will answer for it. But the soil it grew in, that was mine. I had taught Tara that love was a thing you pried loose by being needy, because that was the only kind of loving I had ever rewarded with my whole attention. And I had taught Patsy that being strong meant being invisible, that the price of never asking was never once being chosen. I lay in Boyd's bed, in Boyd's shirt, and I grieved for the 40 years I had spent loving in the wrong direction. And I grieved hardest of all for my quiet daughter, out there an hour away in her steady, careful life, who had learned as a little girl with a blue ribbon in her hand that her mother's lap was always already full of her sister. And somewhere in the deepest, darkest part of that night, after the fireflies had gone and the sky was going grey over the hills, I stopped grieving and started seeing clearly, which is a colder thing and a more useful one. I was not going to sign those papers. I was not going to sell Boyd's shop. And I was not going to spend whatever years I had left being milked by the child I'd ruined, while I ignored the child who'd never failed me. I was done. Not cruel, just done. The pitcher was going to get poured out somewhere true for once, before it ran dry for good. But before I could do any of that, I had to do the hardest thing, which was to drive out to my Patsy's house the next morning. An hour I'd made that drive maybe a dozen times in 30 years, and knock on my own daughter's door, and try to find out if there was anything left in her for me to come home to. She opened the door, surprised. Of course she was surprised. Her mother never came. And I stood on her porch, 71 years old, and all my fine words left me, and what came out was just, "Patsy, I have been a poor mother to you, and I have known it and not faced it for 40 years. And I came to say I'm sorry, and I don't expect you to make it easy." My steady daughter, my calm one, stood there and her chin began to shake, and she said, "Mama, do you know how long I've waited to hear you say that?" And we stood on her porch and we both cried, and her crying was nothing like her sister's, because hers was real. And I had spent 40 years too dazzled to tell the difference. She let me in. We talked for 4 hours at her kitchen table, the longest talk we'd had in our lives. Longer than all our other talks put together, I think. She made me coffee the way I like it without having to ask, which undid me a little. That she knew, that she'd been paying attention to me all these years, even while I overlooked her. She told me things, gentle things, never bitter, which was its own rebuke. She told me about being the girl who set the table and did the dishes, while Tara held court in the living room with her latest heartbreak. She told me she'd decided, around age 10, that the safest thing was to never need anything, because a thing you don't need can't be given to your sister instead of you. She told me she used to make up reasons not to call me, because every time she did, the conversation would turn to Tara within 5 minutes, and it hurt less not to call than to call and be turned away from in the middle of her own sentence. Each thing she said was a small stitch coming out of a seam I'd sewn wrong 40 years ago. And it hurt. The way pulling out bad stitches always hurts the cloth. But underneath it, I could feel the real seam, the one that had been there all along, waiting. And I told her everything. Tara and the papers and the voice on the telephone and my Patsy, who is wiser than I have ever been, did not gloat and did not say a single "I told you so." She just reached across her table and took my hand and said, "Mama, I never once wanted her to lose. I just wanted you to see me." That is the whole of it. That is all my good daughter ever asked of this world in 50 years. To be seen by her own mother before it was too late. Now the reckoning, and I'll tell you plain, it was not a courtroom, and it was not a scene. It was quieter than that, and it had more weight for being quiet. I called Tara and asked her to come to the shop, alone, on a morning before we opened. And I sat her down on her stool by the cutting table, and I did not raise my voice, because I have learned that calm is its own kind of strength, and I needed all of mine. I said, "I heard you on the telephone, Tara, at my kitchen table. I heard you tell Dwayne I'd sign because I feel guilty about Patsy. I heard you say you just had to cry a little and I'd fold." I have never seen the color leave a person's face so fast. She started to cry, the old reliable tears, and I watched her do it. And for the first time in 40 years, it did not move me. And I think she felt the line go slack and knew the fish was gone. She switched to anger then, fast, the way they do. After everything she'd done for me, after she was the only one who came around, while Patsy never lifted a finger. And I let her finish. And then I said the only thing I had. "You came around because I had something you wanted. Patsy stayed away because I never gave her a reason not to. I made you this way, Tara. And I will carry that to my grave. And that is the only reason I am not angrier than I am. But it stops today. I am not selling Boyd's shop. I am not refinancing Boyd's house. There will be no more loans, no more advances, no more rescues. I love you. I will always love you. You are my firstborn, and I sat over your incubator for 30 nights, and I would do it again. But I am done being your bank. And I am done mistaking your need for your love. You are 48 years old. It is time you found your own legs. And the kindest thing I can do, the first truly motherly thing I have done for you in years, is to finally stop catching you. So that just once, you have to learn you won't break." She left in a fury. She said things a daughter shouldn't say to a mother. Things about how cold I'd become, how Patsy had poisoned me, how I'd regret this. And then, 2 weeks later, when the fury didn't work and the well stayed dry, she came back sweet as pie, calling more than she had in years, loving and warm, asking after my health and my knees, and did I need anything from the store. And I knew that song too now, every note of it. The fake warmth that arrives the very minute the money stops. I was gentle with her. I did not throw it in her face. But I was not fooled, not for 1 second. Not anymore. The woman who could not be fooled by her own daughter's tears is a different woman than the one who picked up that pen. And I am glad to be her, even though it cost me 40 years and 1 terrible spring to become her. I did the practical things. calmly, the way Boyd would have wanted. Because Boyd spent his life making sure the people he loved would be safe after he was gone. And I was not going to let his work be undone over a sales pitch. I sat down with a lawyer in town, and I made my affairs fair and plain. Locked down so tight, no sales pitch could ever pry them loose. The shop and the house are protected now, and what I leave behind will be split even between my girls, because Tara is still my daughter, and I will not punish her into poverty. But not $1 of it will pass through her hands before it's time. And the shop, Boyd's shop, goes to the one who actually loves it. Because here is the part that fills me up after everything the rest of it emptied out. My Patsy's boy. My grandson, Wyatt, who is 12 and quiet like his mother, has taken to coming to the shop on Saturday mornings. It started small, him just sitting in the corner with a book while I worked. Then one day, he asked what I was doing, and I showed him. And that solemn child has a feel for fabric and colour that I have not seen in another living soul since Boyd handed me those keys. He'll lay out a stack of fat quarters and find the one combination that sings, the way some people can find true north without a compass. I am teaching him to quilt. His big, careful hands on the frame, his serious face bent down over the stitches, his tongue caught in the corner of his mouth the way Boyd's used to be when he was grading a road. The Thursday Circle has adopted him entirely. Ina Pruitt brings him cookies, and Erlene saved him her grandfather's thimble. And on Saturday afternoons, more and more, Patsy stays too, sitting at the frame across from her son, and the three of us stitch in the light through Boyd's front window. And I look up sometimes and have to put my needle down because my eyes have gone too blurry to see the line. I gave that welcome to the wrong child for 40 years. I am giving it now to the right ones, and they have been gracious enough to take it, late as it came. I should tell you about Tara, because a true story doesn't get to tie every thread. We are not close, the way we were, if you can call what we had close. A mother and a fishhook. The fake warmth wore off when it didn't work, and now we are careful with each other. Polite. The way you are with someone you love, but can no longer be of use to. Dwayne's business folded anyway, the way it always was going to. With my 60,000 or without it, and they are figuring out how to stand on their own feet for the first time in their lives, which is hard at 48, and which I cannot do for them, and which is the truest gift I have ever refused to give. Some Sundays Tara calls, some Sundays she doesn't. I have made my peace with the not knowing. I left the door open, but I took my own hand off the latch, and whether she ever walks through it as a daughter instead of a creditor is up to her now, not me. I pray for her. I love her. I will not be her bank. Those three things can all be true at once, and learning that they could was the hardest sewing I ever did. So here is what I'll leave you with, and then I'll let you go. The world tells you that love is rescue, that the measure of a mother is how hard and how often she catches the child who is always falling. It is a lie, and it nearly cost me Boyd's house and Boyd's shop, and the last good years of my life. And it cost my steady daughter 40 years of feeling like furniture in her own family. The child who needs you the loudest is not always the one who loves you the truest. Loud need and true love can look almost the same from across a kitchen table, and a tired old heart will mix them up every time if it isn't careful. Sometimes the realest love in your life is the quiet one standing off to the side, the one who never asks, the one who set the table while somebody else got the lap. The one you have been too dazzled by the noise to even see. If there is a quiet one in your life, a patsy, somebody steady you have been taking for granted because they never make a fuss and never send up a flare, then you put down whatever it is you are holding right now and you go and let them know you see them, that you have always seen them, even if it isn't true yet, because saying it is how it starts to be true. Don't you wait until you are 71 years old with a pen a quarter inch from the wrong piece of paper. It is not too late to see clearly. It was not too late for me. By the grace of a buzzing telephone and a stubborn old friend at a quilting frame. But Lord, it was close. It was so close. If you stayed with me to the end of this one, I suspect you might be somebody's quiet one yourself. Somebody who shows up and never gets the credit. And if you are, I want you to know that I see you, and you matter more than the loud ones ever will. Tell me where you're listening from tonight, and tell me, are you the one who needs or the one who stays? Both can be loved, but only one of them is easy to overlook. Stay on a while with me, and I'll tell you another. There's sweet tea in the icebox and a chair pulled up to the frame.